anybody legit.
He won't fight Masvidal. Although that would be a good fight to watch though, despite the weight differences. Hi guys, welcome to another episode of the Grapplers Academy. Bonafide PT, coached by Sai. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe button, drop a comment below with your thoughts on today's episode. Just been talking then about rumoured CM Punk, I think it was, and Jake Paul, I think MMA.
It's kind of linking with what we were talking about last week about Jake Paul entering the MMA world to basically retire from boxing if Dana White does increases the pay of all the UFC guys.
Yeah, which I don't see happening anyway.
And I also can't see why anybody would want to watch CM Punk versus Jake Paul. It'd be the weirdest fucking match.
But like, if the guy can get hundreds of millions of views on his YouTube, he probably, no matter who he fights, he's going to get a lot of pay-per-views and views in it.
It's interesting because his brothers, I've seen his brother do some wrestling, and I'm sure he's probably got similar wrestling. They're not bad, are they? Like,
no.
They've got a good like collegiate wrestling, and so if you can combine that or have at least takedown defense with the striking that he has got, which isn't terrible.
It's not terrible, no.
You've got a fairly decent MMA guy there, you know, like somebody who can just defend takedowns and basically, you know, I can't compare him to Francis Ngannou, but something similar to that.
Well, I guess as well, like, he's still young as well, so there's still time to mould him, but also he's got the money to get the best tuition and bring the best training partners in, spend the time training, and quite potentially accelerate through the years of hardship that a lot of grapplers go through to get better at grappling.
Isn't it really weird that somebody's getting this level of interest and basically getting talked about day in, day out by the whole fight community, who's basically a YouTuber who can fight a little bit and is actually getting a lot better at fighting in what is a pretty short amount of time? Yeah, you can get pretty good at boxing or MMA or jiu-jitsu in 3 years. Like, you can be really pretty decent, can't you?
Yeah.
Especially if that's all that you're focusing on. I think he's got other stuff going on as well. I think he's like still one of the highest paid YouTubers, isn't he?
I think so, yeah.
Like number 4 or number 5 or something like that, which is like millions of dollars. But you can get good. Like, you know, his skill set's going to improve. If he was bad in the beginning, he's getting better. You can see that he's getting better. It's an interesting trajectory. It's like, you know, usually it's the other way around, isn't it? You slog through hard years of coming up and as an amateur and going sweaty gyms and whatever and having some crappy fights and getting beat and eventually working your way up to some level of fame that's nowhere near this. And then you've got him doing it the other way around, but doing it pretty legit as well. Yeah,
like, he's taken the fights. The argument for whether some of them were dives or not is potentially still there, but he's fighting, he's getting in the ring, he's getting hit, he's hitting back. I think if he does transition, it'd be very interesting, but I think where will the pay-per-views be if he does go into MMA? Like, I can't see him signing a UFC contract with Dana White still being there. And
he'd have to put it on his own promotion, wouldn't he?
Well, I think to dispel the myths of fighters taking dives, he's got to do it on another organisation.
Why would that stop him taking dives?
It wouldn't necessarily stop him from taking dives, but it takes the power of the contracts out of his hand. So then the rumours of the no knockout clauses and stuff, they won't be there if, say, he was on Bellator or something. And plus the amount, I think you can get a Conor McGregor type deal with a big MMA organisation where you get cut of the pay-per-view, you get equity in the company, as well as your fight purse.
How unrealistic or realistic do you think Jake Paul versus Conor McGregor is in a boxing match in a couple of years?
So with McGregor's current trajectory, I think the likelihood of it is decreasing because he's just becoming a troll that's not having the success in the ring.
it'd still make a lot of money though, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I can't see it making as much money if it was McGregor with 2 titles coming off the back of the Floyd Mayweather fight.
I mean, you know, people can take the piss out of Conor McGregor's boxing performance, but actually when you look at it compared to some of these other transitional fighters between boxing and MMA, he did a pretty good job, didn't he?
Yeah.
Very good job.
His footwork's there. I mean, he's not the cleanest, but taking away a load of tools from somebody and saying, okay, you can only use these now to get the job done, he did do quite well.
Yeah. And he's a natural athlete as well. He's got great physical attributes. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see. I don't want to see CM Punk doing anything really, to be honest. No. Why he just doesn't stick to wrestling?
It was quite interesting watching his. Look, he had like a little docu-series, didn't he, about his UFC debut, where I was like, it was quite interesting watching the training, watching what he put into it. It's just a shame the performance in the ring.
It was interesting until seeing him fight.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know, he's an older guy, not trained.
He's in his 40s, isn't he?
Yeah, I think it's just difficult, isn't it? It's like, Brock Lesnar's a completely different story.
Yeah, like...
It's not the same comparison.
I don't think CM Punk had any sort of wrestling background.
He doesn't seem like the most athletic guy in the world. Like, I kind of almost don't believe his athleticism even enough for what he does in UFC. Not UFC, WWF, the WWE, which I don't think he fights for anymore. I think he's fighting somewhere else, isn't he?
Yeah, I think he's left there, but he's made his mark, and I think I don't think. Yeah, it's weird. Brock Lesnar making that transition made sense. Bobby Lashley made sense.
Well, one of the guys who works here is big into wrestling, and he was saying that they're having their first wrestling match for the first time in forever. So even though they've both been doing it for years, they're having a wrestling match. So I said, why don't they just have an MMA match?
Yeah.
That'd be more entertaining.
Is that Lashley and Lesnar?
Yeah.
That'd be. I think both would be quite insane.
Yeah.
One round wrestling, one round MMA.
You could do it either way around to like set up the rematch, whether that was like they have the MMA match first and then set that up for the what's it, or do it the other way around.
Well, like it makes sense to get them. Maybe this could be the entry to the MMA match. Get a load of hype built around the wrestling match. Because you need to get the wrestling fans bought in first to sell the pay-per-view.
Yeah.
Get those in. And then start getting Brock appearing at MMA events. Maybe get Bobby Lashley sort of seen training with other MMA fighters because not too many people know of Lashley within MMA.
When did he had a stint as a fighter like many years ago, didn't he?
Yeah.
I don't know who he fought for. It wasn't Strikeforce, was it?
I think it might have been. He did some really low-level shows.
Yeah.
And then wasn't one, was it?
I don't know. It was years ago, wasn't it? I mean, I think USADA's not going to have anything to do with that one, which is fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
We were all excited about Overeem coming back. Why can't we be excited against two WWE steadheads coming back and going toe-to-toe?
I think that's what the excitement was about Eddie Hall and the Mountain and the boxing fight. It's kind of like two behemoths who could probably knock each other out if they landed one clean shot. No testing. Getting in the ring.
I'm sure there's plenty of testing.
Oh yeah.
In that fight. I still kind of want to see that a little bit for a bit of a freak show aspect of it.
Yeah. Is it even happening now?
I don't know. All the excitement of it's fizzled out, hasn't it?
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting because Eddie Hall versus Thor was like the exciting thing that was potentially going to happen in boxing, and then when it didn't happen, Jake Paul kind of seemed to fill the void, and the excitement about that's not died down really, has it?
I mean, Thor versus Jake Paul.
I mean,
or even Eddie Hall versus Jake Paul.
Win. I think Eddie Hall
that would be a spectacle.
That would be quite interesting, actually. Yeah, that'd be pretty good. Who do you reckon wins? Eddie versus Jake Paul. Who wins that one? Could Jake Paul?
It's going to depend on the contract because if there's no knockout clause, I don't think Eddie Hall's going to have any tools to win. He's going to have that big Francis Ngannou kind of like swinging punch. He's not going to try and box him, whereas Jake Paul's going to stay on the outside, try and outwork him and sort of dance in and out. Eddie Hall's just going to be trucking forward, just trying to like bite down on his gum shield and swing.
Yeah. Do you think it'd have to be one of like the amateur rule set, wouldn't it, where it's like 3 2-minute rounds or something like that? Just so anyone
2 1-minute rounds.
Basically, just come out, take your best punch, and then That's essentially point sparring in karate, isn't it?
Yeah.
What about Thor versus Jake Paul?
I think purely on reach, I don't think Jake Paul will be able to land much on him.
That's the thing, isn't it? It appears that Thor's is invested more time in becoming proficient at boxing and trying not to gas out, because they both got to be aware that that's going to be the biggest limiting factor. It's like just moving the size of the bodies. I mean, Thor looks like a crackhead and he's 150 kilos. Like, I don't even know how that's possible. How can somebody that's so big look that skinny? But he's not, he's enormous.
Yeah.
But he's just so much person to move around.
Yeah.
And Eddie Hall's just still enormous. I mean, he's lost like 30 plus kilos or whatever, but he's still gigantic. His torso's like the size of a squat rack.
Size of a car.
It's ridiculous. Yeah. Seeing him in person, he's like the same size as a squat rack.
Yeah.
And
the scary thing is, well, like you look at him compared to other strongmen, he looks tiny in height. But then if you look at him against normal people, he's towers over them.
Yeah, he's enormous. It's ridiculous. Thor's technique is definitely there to keep him in the fight for longer. He does get hit because we've seen him fight, and I think a good thing that he has done is fought continually, or had a couple of actual fights just to kind of get him into that amplified, heightened sense of being in a boxing match with the crowd rather than just sparring in your home gym.
Yeah.
It's different.
Oh, massively different.
And even though they've been on the high end of competition for strongman, again, it's different.
Yeah. It's different going out there to get hit compared to going out there to... You can still get just as hurt, or if not worse hurt. But yeah, the type of competition that they'll be going into in the strongman's a completely different kettle of fish.
Yeah. Before we get too much into it and everybody stops listening, we should probably talk about what we were going to talk about.
Yeah, true. Before we were talking about different types of learning at different levels and sort of more conceptual type of training and drilling as opposed to technique specific drilling, weren't we?
Yeah.
The one that you mentioned, I think it's a very, very important one, is the 2-on-1, and it can be applied to pretty much most positions. 2 arms controlling one, or control like 2 legs controlling 1 leg. Just sort of controlling one side of the body with both sides of yours. I think it's quite a powerful concept to play with. Yeah,
my coach Matt Thorpe's been saying for years that he's got the breaks down the basic concepts of jiu-jitsu and what is it in its fundamental form, and one of the concepts is that 2-on-1 control. But as we were talking about before, and we've talked about it before as well, it's difficult to necessarily teach that to somebody straight from the get-go.
Yeah.
Because they don't have any techniques or scenarios in their head already built up from hours and years of training to apply it straight away. So you've got to give people techniques to begin with, haven't you, to kind of like get in that learning process.
Yeah.
And then maybe a couple of months, or depending on the frequency, months or years down the line, then you can start explaining to them the concept of 2-on-1 in more detail. Because you might show them the technique and it might be like an arm drag. Let's just say, for example, something like that, 2-on-1 control on one arm to take the back. And you just show it them, and maybe you briefly explain this is the concept of 2 arms fighting one. Your 2 arms are stronger than their 1 arm. And it might go in one ear and out the other, or they might kind of retain it in the back of their mind. But when they've drilled it for a lot of times, and maybe they've pulled it off a lot of times in training, and they've been on the receiving end of it as well, it starts to sink in more and more over time. And then in a couple of months, you can come back to the same subject and be like, right, we're going to look at the concept of 2-on-1 now. And they're like, well, we did the arm drag, but now you've got a better understanding of how that actually applies. You can go into more detail in the concepts. And the concepts of jiu-jitsu apply everywhere, so it's just not in that arm drag scenario. You've got it in every different scenario: collar tying, grip fighting, everywhere. Yeah,
it's just sort of something. Other ones like that I use is elbow control.
Yeah.
Like, if you sort of start talking about elbow control with someone who's not really trained or sparred much, they're gonna look at you kind of like, what are you talking about? Whereas if you're talking to someone who's got a couple of years training or they've got a lot of mat time under the belt, they're going to understand that controlling the elbows while standing up is going to control where they can go and where the posture is. Controlling the elbows on the ground is going to determine where they can turn to, where they can get away to, or even where their arms are going. And then it kind of always crosses into 2-on-1 control, as well as posture control. And then you've got the other ones where it's like controlling the head. There's lots of concepts out there that will apply everywhere, but it's difficult to talk and introduce those concepts to people who don't already have some hours under the belt.
Yeah. One that I always say to people who are beginning quite early on as well, if like when you're looking at somebody's technique and it just looks quite sloppy, most often the thing is that they're not staying tight in position, like when they're trying to pass the guard or something like that. And usually just like saying to people, I ended up saying it to somebody on Friday as well, one of the biggest rule of thumbs in jiu-jitsu is if you're trying to defend and you're trying to get out of a position, you want to try and create space. And if you're trying to attack, you generally want to try and take away space.
Yeah.
So if you can start applying that early, and that's a pretty easy concept to try and get your head around early on. Like if I'm attacking, I want to take away space from my opponent. If I'm defending, I want to make space so I can escape. And then that can start to tie into stuff like the elbow control. It's like, well, right, okay, I want to take away space. How can I do that? Well, I'm going to lift the elbow out of the way here so I can get my hips in, or something like that. And pretty much almost immediately when you tell somebody, get as tight to the person as you physically can, it takes away a lot of the sloppiness and like the sloppy looking side of new people jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, definitely.
So what would you say I don't know how many there are, so I'm not just going to say the top 5 concepts of jiu-jitsu, but what do you reckon the concepts of jiu-jitsu are? Because I think that space versus no space when you're attacking and defending is one.
Yeah.
We've already said 2-on-1 control, wherever possible, is definitely right up there as well as another one.
I reckon head and posture control is a really big one.
Yeah.
Like if you're standing up, you want to control the head to dictate where the body goes. If you're in top side control, you add a crossface, move the head towards the air and lift the head up, minimises the bridge. You're attacking the back, you're trying to control the head so you can get around the neck. I think the head and posture control is a really big one.
Yeah, that kind of works for both ends of the spine as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So like hips and head kind of tie in, the link in is the spine, so you could say like argue spinal control.
Yeah.
Or like manipulating spine controls, the big one.
Yeah. Probably say as well,
what else we got?
Progressing up the body when you guard passing. So not jumping straight to head and arm, sort of like diving in, but more sort of like get your partner flat and then start dealing with the ankles, dealing with the knees, dealing with the hips, and then the torso, rather than just trying to dive to the end goal and missing out on controlling the things that they're going to use to escape.
Yeah, I think that like you probably tie that in with a similar idea that you end up saying to people as well, like, new people who get excited to jump for a submission before they've even controlled the posture.
Yeah.
It's like that same sort of idea, isn't it?
Position before submission.
Position before submission. Yeah,
it makes sense though.
Yeah. So if we've got the space versus no space, 2-on-1 control, control the spine, and then position before submission. I feel like we need a 5th one just to kind of tie it in nicely.
What I was talking about last night was any good grappler, no matter what level they are, their whole point during that matching round is to make their opponent look terrible. And that's through taking away their control. So like you see it at the top level where if there's someone starts to get that momentum going, their opponent starts to look worse and worse. And it's kind of like you're trying to make your opponent or training partner look really bad during the round, look like a beginner, because you've taken away all of their tools, you've taken away all of their control, you've taken away all of their space, so they can't actually do anything. And they could be top level, but if you've been able to make them look rubbish during that round, you've achieved the dominance and the win in that round.
Yeah, I like the mentality behind that. That's going to be quite a difficult one to implement from like in the early years of jiu-jitsu, isn't it? So could it be a fundamental concept if you can't apply it from?
Well, I guess if you're going against someone who's a similar level to you, and you sort of think, okay, to win this, I just need to make them look rubbish. So if I can pass guard, pin them inside control, and just dominate each position, then I guess it's something that you could apply in the early years. It's just pick your partner who you're going to do it with.
So just fucking go into the kids' class and crush them.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
How about this one for the fifth or maybe a sixth one? And it might be one of the most important ones that I've not even thought about. Like, jiu-jitsu is basically just grip fighting, isn't it?
Yeah. That's a good point.
Whether you're defending chokes, whether you're setting up chokes, whether you're trying to pass the guard, whether you're trying to clear a leg lock, whether you're trying to apply a leg lock, stand up, ground. It might be number one on the list, to be fair. Grip fighting. Jiu-jitsu is grip fighting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pretty much.
Like,
because that applies to the creating space, making space.
Like, you could be trying to isolate an arm, you're still grip fighting whether you're attacking or defending.
2-on-1 is grip fighting.
Yeah.
Control of the head and spine is grip fighting.
Because you're getting a grip.
What was the first one that we said? Space versus no space? No, that wasn't the one, was it? 2-on-1 was the one. Well, space versus no space is grip fighting as well. You've got to create the grips to be able to get your hips in and close in the spaces.
And you've also got to break the grips to create the space to escape.
Yeah, I think that might be number one.
I think that could be it. I think that could be the title.
That's a good way to close out the podcast. So if anybody can listen to the first 25 minutes of us talking shit about Jake Paul and boxing to get to the good stuff, we should just title it and like pin it in jiu-jitsu equals grip fighting.
Yeah.
And then the 5 fundamental concepts of jiu-jitsu.
If you've got any other fundamental concepts that you feel we've missed out, drop them in the comments below. And if there's any interesting enough or controversial enough, we may discuss it.
If anybody puts the third hook, there's something wrong with you.
Do you know what as well, actually? Another concept that I've noticed is the longer you do jiu-jitsu, the less hair you get on your head, but the longer it gets on your face.
Wait a minute.
I mean, it's like when I first started training, I had longer hair and less beard.
Is that just because we're getting old, or is that like a jiu-jitsu thing?
I think it's like a bit of both.
More facial hair, more tattoos.
Just need to get into conspiracy theories now.
Yeah, there's always one of those guys in the gym, isn't there?
Bowing to pictures.
Making sure that your belt's tied in a perfect triangle for the Illuminati. The reptilian Illuminati.
That's why the submission's called the triangle.
Yeah. We've only just figured it out.
So it's going to be renamed to the reptilian.
Actually,
that's why the Kimura. No, it's a square. Never mind.
No, like it's 2 triangles joined together.
That's why it's the strongest grip in jiu-jitsu. It's twice the power of the Illuminati.
That might be another one that's on there as well, to be fair. Triangles.
Yeah.
Triangles are pretty much everywhere in jiu-jitsu.
Wedges. Not potato wedges, although after a good sparring session,
it's been a spicy one, not before like we talked about last week. That could cause an accident. Triangles. Triangles and wedges.
Yeah.
That's another one. Maybe that goes in with space and no space.
Possibly.
I like the grip fighting and Illuminati.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good t-shirt now. We should probably make that as a t-shirt.
It's 3 wrists grabbing each other in a triangle with an eye in the middle.
Isn't that one of somebody's symbols? Like 3 wrists grabbing each other.
Does sound familiar. but if we put an I in the middle of it,
just as long as the third wrist isn't the third hook.
the Great Illuminati.
Yeah. There you go, you can name that as the title.
Yeah.
We're done. Go and follow us on the Grapplers Academy. We're talking nonsense now. Coached by Side, Bonafide PT. We'll see you next week.